So I was thinking, I'm supposed to introduce these people. And then I was thinking, I just met them yesterday. So I don't know them well enough, I feel, to give a comprehensive introduction. So I might just go down the line for a second. Everyone's about 30, 40 seconds of introduction. Just tell everybody who you are and what you want to talk about today. We'll start.
Sean de Cleene, I head up the Food System Initiative at the World Economic Forum. But I come from...
See, that World Economic Forum.
There you go. Yeah, it's been mentioned a few times. I've only been there 6 months. Before that, I was the vice president at AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution for Africa. And before that, I had an extensive entrepreneurship and private sector career. So I've sort of spanned across. But I'm here today to really talk about the innovation side of what we're doing.
Awesome.
Great. I'll just jump in to save Caleb more embarrassment.
Thank you.
I'm Heather Tallis. I'm a global managing director and lead scientist for strategy innovation with the Nature Conservancy. I'm a complexity nerd, so I really liked all the complexity we've been talking about for the last day. I'm a biogeochemist by training, so we love to see all the interconnectivity of the global systems and all of the intricate webs, and get really frustrated with the very siloed nature we take today to solving challenges that live within that web. So I'm really interested in the innovations we can bring from all different sectors to solve challenges in the global food system and other major challenges for the environment and people.
Hi everyone, my name is Niklas Adalberth, and my background is as an entrepreneur in a payment company called Klarna. So as you hear, I know nothing about food systems, but I'm still very, very happy to be here. 2 years ago, I decided to quit my job at this payment company and instead start a foundation called Norrsken Foundation. And what we are trying to do is that we're trying to support impact entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs that try to improve the world in one way or another. And we do that in two ways. First, we have a fund where we can invest in these entrepreneurs. And the other thing is that we have, I think it's the biggest co-working space in Europe for social impact entrepreneurs right in central Stockholm.
Awesome. So we are taking questions from the audience as people start to get warmed up and interested to ask these amazing people some questions. We are apparently also taking them from Twitter. So please, if you want to post there or grab the roving mic that will be at some point running around, that would be awesome. So I'll kick it off. Heather, I'm going to go directly to you. Sean, I'll come back since we didn't get a chance to hang out.
I've been
I want to put you directly on the spot. Can you talk about like a few of the companies or innovations that that highlight this new approach to conservation?
Sure. I'll talk about a couple. We just started very newly a sustainability accelerator with Techstars. You probably have heard of Techstars. We're interested in bringing some of the innovation and entrepreneurship of the tech sector to conservation. One example that led us in this direction is a program that we launched in the last couple of years called Fish Face. So it uses face recognition technology, like you were talking about, Caleb, for fish. Some of you, I'm sure, know that around 80% of fisheries globally are unsustainable. That's because 90% of fisheries globally don't have the data to write a sustainable management plan. So literally almost all fisheries are not monitored. And at this point, there's been huge improvements in limiting the data that we need. So in truth, all you really need now to manage a fishery is to know the species of fish and the size over time. And just from that simple information, we can set stock assessments. And so Fish Face is an automatic camera that the fish are run underneath as they're processed on a boat or in a processing facility. And so over time, after about 100 fish, this software can recognize the species and measure it. And from those data, then we can set reasonable targets for management.
Let me interrupt real quick. I'm sure the audience is surprised to know that I find this fascinating. Like, not just unlocking your iPhone with your face, but then monitoring fish. But the thing that you shared with me yesterday while we were having coffee that really shocked me, and I was going to steal from my talk, but I forgot. 1/3 of the Sustainable Development Goals not tracked, no data on them.
That's a guess. I know there are many of the targets that aren't monitored, so let's just have fun. How many of you think that we have data, at least at a national scale globally, for how much water is used every year? How many of you think we have those data? We know how much water is used.
So many skeptics, a sea of skepticism.
No, but you're right, we don't. So we do not know on a national basis consistently. The World Bank has the largest database available. There's maybe 60% of countries represented. So we do not know how much water we drink. We do not know how much water we use for irrigation consistently. And that is one of the targets to monitor in the SDGs, water consumption. We can't do it today. How
can so many statistics be quoted on this stage if we're not measuring water consumption? Sorry. So let's move on. Some of the companies that you're supporting out of the new foundation and that you're excited about.
Right, there's a few ones. I think within food and food systems, it's 3 we currently have invested in. One of them is Karma, which is very similar to the one that was previously on stage here, but more focused, I guess, on UK and Sweden. Another one that is very exciting is a company called WeFarm. So it's the biggest peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer network in the world. I think they're connecting today about 850,000 local small farmers in mainly Kenya and in Tanzania, and they can pose questions to each other, and that is increasing the yield significantly. So that's really cool application. Another one is called MatSmart. We can buy food that otherwise would be wasted due to they're wrongly labeled or the due date is too close. So everyone in Sweden and I think in the Nordics can go into this website, MatSmart, and shop these foods online.
I think it's an amazing trend. I mean, obviously we talk about it in the news all the time with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and all this, but who owns data and who benefits from data? That model of connecting 850,000 farmers might not seem that disruptive at the moment, but that takes, you could play the futures market. You could disrupt Cargill and Kleiner Perkins by getting better data at the source from farmers. And I'm seeing this happen all around the world. I think that's incredibly fascinating and an amazing thing to support at the moment when we need giant wells of data to solve future problems. In image recognition, you need 100,000 training slides before you get to identifying a fish. And so anyway, that's enough for me. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why are you excited to be here? What would you like to share?
Well, I mean, we're here because there's a huge opportunity. But it's interesting, when we did the analysis as part of our work around the 4th Industrial Revolution, we really zoned in on food. And it was interesting, since 2010 to now, there's been about 1,000 startups in food system startups. In the health space, at the same time, there's been 18,000. So, there is still huge opportunity for this to grow, and we need to figure out, right, what do we need to do to unlock that? So, 14 billion invested into that space in agriculture, 145 billion invested into that same space in health. So, how do you unlock that opportunity that's there? We've obviously got a long way to go. I think the other is then, we're still often working, it's that breaking the silos piece. There's a danger with a lot of the innovation that we're coming into that we work, everyone's getting very excited by blockchain and we run down that particular rabbit hole and we focus on that. Or we focus on, cell phones, or we focus on gene editing in isolation. And we focus on the technology. What's going to be critical is how do you do this across systems? How do you get entrepreneurs working in the food space to be working across, into the health space and take a systems view into the education space, into the finance space, come up with smart policies. I mean, at the moment there are, if we're doing audience participation, how much would you say, you should know this, some of you will know it, the academics amongst you, that we spend in a year on food subsidies?
Across the world. Anybody want to take a guess? Do I have $2? $2? $3? No one wants to guess. Come on, let's go. Numbers. Go, throw them out. How much across the world?
They need more coffee.
You got a hand up over here. 450 billion.
Exactly, yeah. 450 billion. It's actually
Cheater! The time was used to use Google, wasn't it?
And $450 billion a year. But if that was turned around and used in a smart way to drive eco-efficiency, to drive innovation, you would see that. And you're starting to see that. In India, we were talking with Andhra Pradesh recently, and they've put 1 million water sensors into 1 million farmer fields to track water data data over the coming years to be able to link that to crop pricing and insurance mechanisms and link that to drone technology and create that whole overlay on top of a digital ID framework that they have for individual citizens. So that whole overlay aspect and the impact that could have. I mean, we were talking about animal protein alternatives a bit recently. If the world shifted 10 to 15%, just that, from animal protein to alternative protein by 2030, I mean, we would reduce land in agriculture by up to 450 million hectares. We would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 650 to 950 megatons. And that's just in that 10 to 15 shift. You can take each of these technologies and you will see those impacts. And so binding that up is powerful.
Absolutely. So one of the ways to either completely stifle innovation, which I think we have a great selection of panelists to ask this question about policy. One of the things that completely stifle innovation or incredibly accelerate it across all these different things would be policy. So I'm interested to hear from the three different perspectives. How does policy affect new technologies? How are you thinking about advocating for that? Do you avoid it at all costs? Do you run ahead of it, which is the typical kind of innovation model? Or could a data back, you're mentioning all these sensors and fields. I'm saying the same thing. We're getting this described world. Question I have is who owns all this data and who's going to be using it for or against us? But either way, can policy be used more effectively? Are new policies coming that are data backed? And how do you think about that? Maybe start from this side and move to that.
I mean, the biggest challenge we're going to have is, if you're going to jump to this open source world, which is very exciting in some ways, how do we make sure we don't leave people behind? How is this done inclusively that brings people in? As you said, who owns that data? These big questions. And so how do you use policy in a smart way to create that inclusivity? And then how do you build that policy to build that ecosystem? That will link all of this technology to the world that we live in a very adaptable and nimble way, that suits the people that it needs to, which in many cases is a smallholder farmer who's working on an analog phone and they don't even have necessarily a smartphone.
Right.
I'll take a totally different entry point. I don't know much of the policy side around the tech innovation, and we see a real need for the cross-silo policy stuff to start happening, sometimes for ag technology adoption. So for a very basic mechanical innovation that's come out of India now, we work in northwest India with the cropping system for rice and wheat. Right now, the most cost-effective appearing option is to burn wheat after the crop to clear the field for rice. This is now a third of air pollution in Delhi in the fall. So it's a major part of the challenge. People are aware of it. And there is an equally profitable alternative now through a tractor that's been innovated in country, beautifully named the Happy Seeder. And so it basically allows you to do no-till rice. So you can plant into the standing wheat chaff without burning it. And now what needs to happen is something on the policy side to unlock this, because there's questions about the viability of the technology. Even though it's been proven in the field, there's 1,000 of them in operation. The current subsidies push against adoption in net. And what you have is what I think we're likely to see a lot with ag technology, which is that there's the same profitability on the private side, but there's huge public benefit from this technology. It's a huge benefit for public health through air pollution reductions. It will lead to a big reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and that cropping system is a lower requirement for groundwater use. So the public benefit side is clear. The subsidies are lower, the benefits are higher, but that doesn't accrue to the farmers who have to adopt the technology. So there's a clear and obvious role for policy to play to support the public benefit side of allowing the transition for a period of time, and then once the transition happens, the policy can move on.
See, this is what I'm talking about. There's solutions out there that may hit 5 of the categories of the Sustainable Development Goals of food. Right. We could see that it was a number 2, a number 7, and a number 8, and a number 9, and why is it not funded? And I think a lot of it is about awareness. Yeah. How do we drive awareness? Who's funding these projects? So then we'll move, and we'll give you 2 questions just for being the last one, and I'll come back and you'll get 2 next time. One is to follow up on the policy discussion with how you look at it, what you would hope for as you kind of launch, as we talked about yesterday, this impact unicorn. I think it's amazing that some of the partners of this fund are from Candy Crush and from Minecraft. I mean, this is awesome. So when you aim this new vehicle, one of the questions from the crowd is, to what extent do you see impact investing becoming a topic of interest for institutional investors? And then if you want to say anything about policy, it's all.
Right, so start off with policy. So my experience is in payments, which is very different to food system. But I think there's some similarities, and that is that it's a slow change in consumer behavior, it's very localized, and it's quite regulated, and hence also affected by policy. But I think that if it all comes down to the entrepreneurs being able to navigate in that landscape and hopefully be ahead of that, and not just be reactive to policy. And so I think that the scarce factor when it comes to improving the world are great entrepreneurs and not necessarily innovation and technology. There's tons of innovation and technology. The hard part is to execute some of that innovation and make that scalable and massive successful. So that was a little bit around policy. And the second question was once again...
Yeah, to what extent do you see impact investing becoming a topic of interest among institutional investors? I mean, you're starting this new model that's kind of unicorn players, big exits into foundations, create companies that are socially minded. You can have the double bottom line. Is this going to trickle into traditional impact and traditional institutional investment as well?
Right. So what we see is that we don't see that there is a trade-off between necessarily with impact and IRR to get a good return. And as soon as the institutional investors realize this, I think more capital will flow into this direction. But before that, I think what is also needed is that more entrepreneurs need to be more interested in solving real problems. I don't know how it is in your countries, but at least in Sweden, it's all about becoming super profitable and become the next unicorn company, hence reach a certain valuation. What about if these same entrepreneurs actually could care more about solving not, I don't know, games or payments, but actually solving real problems? Maybe that then will attract more great talent. And you talked about it before, that the millennials are already caring about this. And with greater talent moving into this space, I think the IRRs will improve and hence institutional capital will follow.
Awesome. I'm going to start back with you again. You remain in the hot seat. Remember, you can ask questions of these brilliant people on stage. Please get involved and engaged with the mic that is maybe roaming at this point, and or Twitter. So from the digital edge, and I'm wondering, is that an AI? I don't know. Like, is it coming from the actual edge of the internet? Anyway, from the digital edge, what are your thoughts on companies like Amazon and other digital giants and their influence over consumer behavior? How can the digital transformation in food be leveraged to make people eat more healthy and sustainable?
Can I come back tomorrow and answer that?
I mean, it's the Amazon take over the world question. So,
right.
Like, do you think that some of these technologies can be decentralized in the world of these centralized kind of tech players? And if so, how would you do it and what would it change?
To be honest, I don't know. I see that Amazon and the giants have a massive effect in changing consumer behavior, for sure. They're setting new norms and how to actually do stuff online and offline. But with that said, I also see like local initiatives and local entrepreneurs are doing very great things, because still it is a lot about localization and making a great consumer experience, and that needs localization. And it's very hard for Amazon and the other ones to keep up with that in these certain markets. I mean, look at Klarna once again. We don't have anywhere close to the resources that PayPal and so on have. I mean, I think they have close to 100,000 employees. We have 2,000 employees. But still, we have a great consumer proposition in the local markets that we are active in, because we're able to localize. So I think there will be room for both players.
So I think we'll keep on the Amazon train if you want. Or just talk a little bit more about how digital transformation could affect conservation, could affect food, and then does this have a relationship with the big companies and all that?
Yeah, this is on the edge for me too, but
Cool.
I think one thing I'll say is something Niklas mentioned before. I think there's the opportunity for all of the actors in this space to be in what I think should be the current standard, which is that anything that gets pushed forward at this stage should align in a way with the SDGs. Right? We should be past the point at which anything we're moving forward doesn't serve the environment, social benefit, and profit. And there's so much flexibility in the systems now. There's so much innovation and creativity. It just seems really old school, personally, in my view, to do anything that doesn't hit a triple benefit mark anymore. And I think this applies in everything that we're talking about. And obviously, there's opportunity to bring the existing science and rapid problem solving to finding those options wherever you're coming into the system from.
Amazon, taking over the world?
I mean, food is very local by its nature. And even though there is a global aspect to it, the big trading part, people also buy fresh vegetables and all that are also very local. And so it has those two sides. And I think there will be huge scope for innovation that plays to that diversity. And what we actually need in the food system is incredible diversity, and so whether that can be captured through a handful of players, I would say not. I would say that actually the innovation is completely there for disruptive agendas, and whether that's breadth in the food proposition that we can buy, or the innovation in through how that's sourced. So there's great opportunity there.
Yeah, and I mean, and from my own perspective, seeing what's going on in the agricultural sciences, it was also dominated by 1, 2, maybe 3 companies, which are also starting to break up for loss of talent. People not wanting to go to that company for whatever reason, they don't feel good about it, the public perception, losing top scientists, going to startup land because the venture capital is insanely available. You just have to say blockchain and walk away, and they throw money at you, and then everyone's mystified. But with the amount of institutional investment coming from like General Mills and Cargill and Unilever and all these folks, from all of the Silicon Valley, from unicorn founders, from institutional investors across the board and across disciplines, it's an amazing time.
And I can just add to that as
Yeah,
well. I think that when it comes to these bigger companies, they are not willing to take the same kind of risk that is necessary to do innovation. I mean, if you have a brand such as Amazon, you don't want to necessarily screw up that brand by doing some mistakes. But to succeed as an entrepreneur, the key component, I think, is to take risk. I mean, within normal tech entrepreneurship, I think like 99 out of 100, they fail. But the 100, that one succeeds really, really good and hopefully can scale it thanks to technology. So I think it will always be like a comparative advantage to be small and nimble and agile as a startup compared to these bigger players.
So the bounce around mic has arrived. I'd love to get the audience engaged. I know you must have questions. So if people could just start raising their hands, this soft microphone will be thrown to you. I don't know. Maybe walked over. It'd be more fun if it was thrown. There's a hand over here. In the meantime, while we walk around, you mentioned something interesting, which is risk. I'm interested in this kind of, it's either utopian or dystopian. Like we talk about where the world is going and all these things that could fix it, but now the moral hazards that are coming up. And you mentioned, innovations that sometimes carry unknown risk before you put them into the field and realize, I think we were talking about a water pump. I don't know, maybe you could start with that and then we could kind of juggle the topic around. Do you invest in the risky startup? Do you evaluate moral hazard ahead of time? Do you do it what's the approach to bringing new things in a time where, they could not have the intended result?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there are examples of technologies and innovations on the agricultural side that weren't beneficial environmentally or necessarily agriculturally. For example, irrigation efficient technologies, so like drip irrigation. The idea initially in some places where it was implemented was that having more efficient water use would lower overall water use for irrigation. In fact, of course, what it does is give farmers an opportunity to expand their ag area and use the same amount of water for more crop, which obviously is good for profitability but doesn't help on the water efficiency side. So that's an example of there was an unexpected outcome, from wide-scale use of that technology. That's been shifted a lot now, and there are different ways policy regulates that or other parts of the system regulate that use. But I think we see lots of things coming now where that is likely to happen again or could happen again if we don't ask the questions up front. So for example, lab cultured proteins has come up several times today, and it is a really burgeoning space of exploration where there's still unanswered questions about what is the actual nutritional benefit of some of those cultured proteins, what are the environmental impacts of the life cycle. You still have to build proteins out of something. They don't just materialize. And
Don't tell
so
anybody.
what's the basis of that source and what's the full life cycle impact of those proteins? They could be really beneficial, right, for climate and for the environment, but those questions aren't answered yet. So I think we need to enter into a phase where we're much more comfortable very rapidly asking the science questions on all fronts, including moral hazard questions, and getting at least a quick answer before things go into real market scaling and major investment.
Would either two of you like to jump in on that?
I think there's a big issue around food, and we had a meeting this morning to discuss food systems dialogues. And there's a meeting tomorrow that maybe a number of you are coming to, which is the first of these food systems dialogues. And a key component around that is around building trust. I think actually the lack of trust around the food system itself is going to be a key issue. And if we can't get over that hurdle where people are able to have those differences of opinion and bring those out into the open and be able to objectively look at what are those pathways forward, then we're not going to be able to discuss some of those moral hazards up front. And so that trust deficit at the moment really needs to be overcome. And if we're going to really create systemic and transformative change.
But this is so tricky for you as an investor, Niklas. Like, we want to know everything about what you're doing ahead of time, how it's going to end up before you make an investment, or we might criticize you for making the investment. So
Not really, I would say.
Okay, how do you balance that need for secrecy of a startup most of the time versus the transparency that's being demanded? I mean, it's almost an impossible ask.
So to me, once again, the biggest risk to us when we invest is the entrepreneurs. Are they still going to remain friends? Are they going to be great entrepreneurs? Are they actually going to solve all of these to-dos that is up for them? I mean, when they come to us, maybe they've been working together and been looking into this issue for maybe a year or so. Still, like another 10, 20 years, they're going to work together and try to solve and dive into these issues. So it's, to me, that is where the risk is, really, and try to support them and try to make them successful. I remember when I started Klarna, I had a couple of months of experience in payments looking into this issue. Before that, I think it was 2 years experience at Burger King flipping burgers. So I knew nothing about it. And if I would know a lot about it, I would never have started it. And I think it's the same thing when you come into complex food issues. The entrepreneurs we meet will be naive and they won't have that much experience, and that is fine, because that's when you will tackle and you will figure it out down the road if you're a great entrepreneur.
Great. Let's pop it out to the audience. I know that cube must have... it landed. If you just say who you are and what you think, what you'd like to ask.
Well, my name is Alicia Douglas, and I'm with waterrising.org in the States, and we are a nonprofit startup, but we have brought an integration of partners together to solve a lot of the same problems that you were talking about today, and applying more censoring technologies, but then also applying purse prizes. And we have partnered with a group called Waterworks Fund that will be launching a $20 million innovation fund that we would like to be able to bring next year to this platform and offer $1 million purse prize for innovative solutions, because I think it's finally about time that it's not just about talking about it, but how you can start scaling these and being able to get it to be able to solve the problems that we have, not just here, but of course around the world.
So let me point it to a question.
So I guess the question is that especially I guess in Sweden, why has the current investment or the impact investors taken an approach from a pitch standpoint and put purse prizes to incentivize?
I suppose that's directed at you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you please repeat again?
So to incentivize, all right, and to create solutions to these problems, we believe that we have to be able to provide funding and to support those entrepreneurs.
So are you asking like X prize versus pitch to an
Correct.
investor?
Right. Well,
Maybe
no.
right
I mean,
now.
it's a combination. It's a pitch along with a purse prize.
So are you asking why he doesn't do that?
No, I guess it's one of the questions, or
Okay.
open it for a dialogue.
Yep.
Content is that how do you see yourself partnering with those types of things?
So I think all of that kind of initiatives is very important. Everything from prizes to pitch competitions to normal investing and so forth. I think everyone is needed, really. But I think what is most important, what we believe at least, is that we need to create role models within this space. I mean, just as Sweden have created a lot of great unicorn companies, I think that is thanks to Niklas Zennström funding Skype 10, 15 years ago. What about if we can get like what we call, as you said, an impact unicorn, someone that is affecting 1 billion people, not have $1 billion in valuation? I think that is really what will drive talent and will drive investors to look into this space much more, and will be more competitions and so forth. And that is really what will make the biggest change. But before that, all of that is needed for sure.
So Heather and Sean, do you have anything to say about
Yeah, I'll add. I mean, I think it's great to see more platforms like this developing. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on how we take sort of lean startup thinking and move it into impact land, right? And some of the social entrepreneurship and impact investing is doing a good job of transitioning into social outcomes. I think we still have a gap in the environmental outcome space in these platforms that are incentivizing creativity. There are some platforms that aim to be about sustainable social solutions, and I won't name any of them, but I think they're all still pretty short on the environmental impact side, and it's hard, right? I get it. But I think more encouragement of that kind of exploration, and that can also be helped by the way the challenges are teed up and framed, right? Something you were saying earlier, Niklas, right? One challenge could be, how do we, develop a new app that's going to entertain, 5 million children for the next 5 years, versus how do we develop a technology that's going to deliver water monitoring information consistently at the national scale and report into the SDGs, right? So there's plenty of opportunity for challenge platforms to be directed towards the real intersection spaces here, and it's a big gap, in my view, that could be filled a lot more effectively.
And just, how do you layer on if you're going to put social and environmental issues at the core, of a startup?
Yeah.
Often that's not necessarily the role of the impact investor who's trying to do that. They're trying to make sure as you said, the entrepreneur is the right fix and all that. And so then how do you create that layered environment where it allows an entrepreneur to build in from the start that social and environmental agenda, which is difficult when you're trying to get everything else right at the beginning as an entrepreneur. And so how do you incentivize that?
I can tell you that in my own experience, I have failed miserably trying to do this. I keep trying, but I looked at Mozilla as a model. I was like, they have a company that makes money. It's owned by a nonprofit. They have full control over that Mozilla Corp from Mozilla Foundation. They can take, and my question was, could the Mozilla Corp have taken investment? If it took investment, would it have killed everything that happened for Mozilla and is still happening? So I actually tried this, created a nonprofit, paid all the legal fees that were mentioned earlier that are horrible, and I nested these entities together, and it scared away everyone because it was like, wait, I'm going to give you venture capital to go into a company that's going to benefit a nonprofit who's going to have a say on the board? I don't think so. And then on the nonprofit side, they were like, you're going to make money inside of there, selling things and scale a company? Not interested. I'm a philanthropist. So I actually think, where we're going is a search for new models of investment. So is there any question from the audience? Anyone bouncing around? Okay. Then I'll take one from Twitter, and we'll bring the box over to the front. Okay. Another investment question. Should we stop with investing questions? This is getting a lot. Let's talk about data for a second. Data. A sea of data, yet not a drop to drink. Swallowed by sharks of all kinds. Needed for everything you need for conservation, for your work in mapping and understanding all the interconnectedness and defining new pathways, and for obviously a million things with you. How do we get to a place where more data is shared in the food space? Will we get there? What's necessary? And how do you think about data in your own pursuits? Anybody?
I can just start. I think collecting data is the easiest thing in the world, but to make sense of that data and to work with it and process that data, have top data scientists working on that data, that is the
Crazy
difficult
expensive,
part.
yeah.
And very expensive, and very few people that can handle that massive data sets. But with that in place, and most of the bigger companies can handle this, that is very, very effective, of course, and can do a lot of things with it.
Yeah, I know, companies like defense companies that handle massive amounts of data spend 70% of their time just cleaning it. No one thinks about how disgustingly horrible it is to sit through and clean data, to make it useful, to tag it, to put metadata on it. We all talk about it, but I think it's an interesting struggle, especially for conservation. If we had better water data, you could do your job more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge opportunity to be more efficient and strategic about the data we're collecting. Right? I mean, you can cut down the time it takes to clean data if you're collecting it on purpose for a use from the beginning. And so, again, I think there's tons of existing platforms and priority sets of metrics that have been established and accepted and adopted that we aren't collecting sufficient data on. And so just starting there with intentional data collection plans or intentional data wells, if you want to build them, to collect those data would be a huge step forward. And again, there's a lot of starting points already. We don't need to have another discussion about what set of metrics we should be collecting. There's plenty of starting points to go from.
Absolutely.
I think another thing worth saying here is that I think we are talking about new models and all need to be comfortable experimenting with new models of data sharing and access and ownership. We have a soil health partnership in the US that's similar to one of the charts you showed about farm-based data, where we're in really uncomfortable conversations with farmers about how we can support them to collect high-resolution soil health data on their farms, how they can have access to those data, and how we can get some information that they're comfortable sharing across farms so we have a bigger picture of what's actually going on with nutrient loss and soil health and carbon sequestration across a landscape. And it's uncomfortable and an important uncomfortable position to be in so that we each hear each other and can see how far can we go. What do you really need to keep for yourself? What are you going to end up talking to your neighbor about anyway, which is happening? And so then you're okay releasing those data once you realize you're not going to crash your farm because you're doing it. So I think more of those kinds of discussions where we allow people to sit where they are and move a little bit in response to each other about what transparency needs to look like is going to really help in making a lot more data usable and useful.
Quick poll. How many data scientists in the room?
One.
Everyone wants to talk to you, too. You've just blown up. So the fact that they're missing here, I think is a great point to make from your comments. Where are the data scientists and the people that actually have to deal with this? How are they going to be involved in our conversations going forward? I'm super curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it just builds on the points that have been made. I think when we're looking at sort of the digital economy, you're really looking at, right, how do you make it sustainable? How do you build inclusivity? And how do you make this trustworthy? And, working across those frameworks. And so then putting a data lens on top of that, what are going to be those business models, that are going to make this work? How do you share in a way that fulfills those three agendas? And it's complex. When you layer that data question on top of a food, system agenda, you've got multiple layers of complexity. And then if you're linking that into health and education and all of that, this is challenging, but it's a really compelling agenda that I don't think we should at all shy away from. And I think we have the ability to really move forward on this.
And I would wonder, since France is so quick at making laws, apparently, I just learned, could we have a law or could we have a mandate from government that says, if I fund your project with public money, then your data must be open? And if we did such a thing, we'd probably have to create an entity to manage it. I'm just going to posit that out there as an idea. Like, why do we pay for research and study without collecting all of the physical, data behind it to make it available to everyone? Why do we write papers that no one wants to read that lock information? Anyway, I'm on my own soapbox. There is a question in the audience.
Yeah, so my name is Laura Jana, and I am a U.S.-based pediatrician, but focused on public health innovation. I'm at Penn State with their Prevention Research Center as well. And I'm interested in the conversation around impact investing. Interested in particular, the mention of, for example, we need an impact unicorn. The concern I have is that if we apply the same metrics for what sort of return you want on your investment and it's measured in dollars, it significantly limits, whereas what I'm finding and looking at sort of the complex systems approach to investing with long-term outcomes, especially in my case for children, is what if you got a 2x return instead of a 100x return? Are you using different metrics for what sort of return you hope for that aren't just based on the financial outcomes but also on the impact side? Because I think the impact unicorn is going to be much harder to achieve than getting funding put into people who may, I'd put my money anywhere if there's a 2x return. I don't care, right? Because I want to have the impact as well. I'm just wondering if that's actually what you're seeing and what you're doing in terms of investments that are coming in.
Awesome question. I'm going to pair it with the one that I skipped earlier because it was the same question, so this is apparently in the zeitgeist. Is demand for upscaling from investors an obstacle in sustainable, resilient food systems, as price profit is information in the system, but social and environmental costs are not? I think this is very similar to your question. Maybe for the panel to address, we'll start with Niklas.
Yeah, so I think it's you need to cover the full spectrum as an investor or what the world needs. So, for example, in our fund, we have two different buckets. We have one that we call a market development bucket, where investors can maximum get 1x in return. So we expect to not get the full money back there. And that is for those initiatives that has less likelihood of success, where we want to take much higher risk, and it could even be investments in non-profits. And then we have the other bucket, where we do expect market returns of 15% IRR or whatever, just as any other fund. What we see now, however, is that, which is a little bit surprising, we've only done this for 2 years, is that it's actually the entrepreneurs that are in the more higher financial return bucket, they are much more likely to succeed and are actually then also solving more problems, so to say. So I think that when we're going to expand this to the next phase with new funds, I think we will continue to have this model of having two buckets, but it's probably going to be much more money in the more financial return bucket. But both are needed. And we also need like normal philanthropy, normal non-profit to cover like the normal charity box, because you can't monetize everything, right?
Yeah, let me jump in and say that's pretty interesting and novel, because the ones where I've seen kind of family offices try to do this, they have to separate the organizations completely. There's a firewall between their philanthropy and their investments, because they don't want to be seen seeding the pot through philanthropy to get an early return or a bigger return through investment. And I don't know if that's because of the laws of the United States that are different, maybe here or other places, but I think that's a fantastically interesting thing that you're able to do.
And I was just going to say that it's taking a broader frame as well, in the sense that we often have these conversations specifically around impact investors and where they're at. But then we have a completely separate conversation around, say, pension funds and institutional investors, which can really shift the needle in a big way. And in a former life, I was heavily involved in black economic empowerment agendas in South Africa when that was taking off. And it was actually that learning journey that we went on at that time, was to shift from just the entrepreneurship, socially responsible investment agenda through to what you needed to shift pension funds. And I think when you're taking a systems view of this, it's trying to think through, what are those acupuncture points that can really create a tipping point at scale. And if you can move pension funds into taking a more innovative, long-term view on these agendas, it will have a significant impact on the whole way in which impact investing is done and the metrics that are being assessed. And so it's taking that composite view of...
Absolutely. I was shocked when I was asked to give a talk to a bank. I was like, what do you want me to talk about? It was a bunch of sovereign wealth fund people. I was like, these are the least risky. I'm the most risky person. And and it was interesting when I talked about this future of food and what would change. I said, well, how do you see that then from your sovereign wealth fund, from your large bank for lending for land? And they said, well, with all the disruptions that may be caused, we hear you saying that the value of arable land may go down. which would be epic for pension funds and for sovereign wealth funds, because they all invest in arable agricultural land because it's the most stable thing that's grown consistently forever. So I'm just fascinated that perhaps if we had a bigger way to look at this, we could use those funds with a little more risk, with a little more long-term. And we have no VCs that have 30-year horizons, but we certainly do with pension and sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah, no, I think this is a fantastic conversation and would love to see that kind of a more system view. I think the Omidyar network has an interesting model too, where they do the whole range of kinds of investing within one house. I don't know how they do that. I don't know anything about those details, but it's really clear when you're trying to change a system, right? There's a lot of different entry points that need to be hit, and there's a different kind of investment that's going to make sense depending on the kind of change you're trying to cause. And I think we do very little now of that kind of creative matchmaking, right, in a comprehensive view, and a whole lot of gravitation towards one model that we think is sexy and fun and fundable. And I mean, I think something you said is a really interesting point. You had some challenge in maybe recruitment with your social impact fund side, and so now you're going to put more money into the easy way to do things, right? And I think that's worth really reflecting on, right, because you have pressure to drive the business you're trying to drive. And there's a fail in that system, right? If we can't recruit the best people to drive social impact, that should hit for everyone, right? And that's an opportunity for us to think differently about how we're matching up these investment opportunities, how we're recruiting people to these challenges. We're obviously not doing it right yet.
Even though I must say, I think this is changing now very rapidly. Yeah. I think that we've never been able to recruit as good as we have done now.
Oh, that's great.
And a lot thanks to the statistics we saw of the millennial generation, that they really value this so much.
Yeah, that's great.
But it's still yet to be seen the serial entrepreneurs that have experience to actually move into this space and tackle real problems. Yeah. That's where I think it's still lacking.
Interesting.
2-minute warning. If you are dying to ask a question like this happy person here, you should grab that box. You're not going to have much more time. Please.
My name is Charlotte Dufour.
Please speak up a little bit.
My name is Charlotte Dufour. I'm an independent expert, so it's called on food systems. I'm not an economist, which may be revealed in my question, but I'm wondering if the other side of the coin of this discussion is not that on negative externalities. Yesterday, Mr. Verghese brought this question of 2.9 trillion of negative externalities on our environment, on our health, and I'm wondering who's accountable financially? Who pays for the environmental costs, the negative public health impacts of some of our unsustainable food productions? And I think it's great to have that positive side on the benefits of investing in sustainable strategies. But isn't the competition with traditional non-sustainable strategies unfair if we're not accounting anywhere for those external negative externalities? And I'm wondering, maybe in the WEF or in these new business models, how do we bring in the negative costs of not doing business sustainably, which right now the poorest on the planet are paying, or the governments, so this is
Got it. Lightning round.
Question.
10 seconds from each of you on that. Seriously.
My 10 seconds here is that, and I think EAT have been very strong on this, particularly with the EAT Lancet work, is also trying to get some of both the scientific targets and pathways lined up there. We don't have them in food systems the way we do in, say, climate change. Until you have them, it's very hard to start to create the measurements around those.
Again, information leading to the ability to
Exactly, and then the same with policy until you get that clear policy direction on the economic costs of this, including externalities, which we don't have of food systems. You can't, so what you can't measure, you can't price.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have tons to work off of already, though. The India example I gave, there's plenty of data about the public health crisis that's been created by these mechanisms. That's a huge externality. There's a clear way to stop that through a change in policy that drives adoption of a new technology. So there's plenty of systems where we have the data, we have the information, we have the technology, and we need a shift in either the policy or the market to drive adoption.
And I agree with the former panelist.
The quickest use of the 10 seconds. Okay, and we will close with this. I'm sorry if someone is holding on to that box now with a dying question. What's the most exciting future trend in food tech to you?
For me, it's the breaking out of this outside of just, say, Silicon Valley, and that you're really seeing dynamism in India, in different parts of the world, and you're seeing that regional, regional sort of innovation coming up, which is really exciting. Yeah.
I'm going to answer a slightly different question. So for me, the most exciting thing about egg innovation is that innovation is being used in multiple parts of the food system, not just in tech, but in bringing some of the silos together in new and really disruptive ways. I'm very excited about that.
And I guess to me, it's all about seeing these entrepreneurs going into this space to tackle these issues and taking a lot of risk. Failing, but some will succeed. Very good.
So that's the way I wanted to end this panel, with a little bit of positivity from the stage about how the future is going to be. So please join me in thanking these wonderful panelists. And you don't have to hear from me anymore.